Yeah, welcome everyone.
Hi, I'm Ali Scott and I am a coach, a transformative coach. I work with anyone and everyone really, but I do happen to be focusing a lot on young people, teenagers at the moment as well. I'm just about to start a parenting online course as well, actually, coming up quite soon in June. And yeah, I've been in the 3P non-dual inside out community for some time. So just really wanting to help spread this message a bit further.
Okay. And now the famous Joel.
Hi. I don't know what I'm famous for, but okay. Joel Drasner. I'm ensconced in Los Angeles, California, where I'm a resilience coach, working with people here and anywhere this wonderful technology will lead us. As a resilience coach, people often hear that and go, huh? Or what's that? And I usually try to translate into that what I like to call an end of suffering coach.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a niche because if you say you're a life coach, it's such a broad umbrella in the outer world, so to speak, then that people just really don't know what it is, and often what they sense it might be is very different from what it is that I suspect Ali does. So I tell people that I share a simple truth about life that when I saw it seemed to cause decades of chronic, undiagnosed, but very impactful anxiety to drop off of my, whatever it is that anxiety was weighing me down from. it kind of disappeared almost overnight. And the more I looked into the understanding of what it is that I share, the deeper it went. There were several waves of further feelings of liberation. And there seems to be no real drop off from it. I have my moments, of course, and there are habits of things and old crappy feelings that come back from time to time. It just seems that all of those feelings are like there's been a floor put underneath them. And that floor is on a foundation of, and even above the floor, are made of this sense of unbreakable okayness. And not okay like, oh, that's just okay, but like really, really good okay. Well, the title we picked was being titanium. So the unbreakable quality of titanium with sort of a Teflon aspect to it, where nothing from the past seems to stick to that condition of life. So I've been trying to share that with people in various different venues. A recent venture that I'm doing with a friend is focusing on actors, of which rumor has it there's a lot here in the Los Angeles, Hollywood area. Sharing with them.
It's a very niche market.
Yeah, it's a niche, very, very boutique. Hopefully we'll find one or two. I used to pursue that. I'm a recovered actor who still belongs to the union, and kind of hoping that by sharing this with actors, a lot of the stuff that seems to be in their way of at least happily pursuing their career could fall away very quickly. A lot of times they. I'm going on a lot in my introduction of me. Is it okay? I'm kind of launching into what it is you do.
That's absolutely no. Just carry on. Let's carry on. I was just thinking that not only is it, if you're sharing it with actors, it's a bit like Nick Bottini sharing with musicians. That the more influence those people have, and the more they're seen by the public to be having such amazing results, like the results that you're talking about, the more people are going to be interested in finding out, well, what's that about?
Absolutely true. I mean, that's a part of the long non-planned game plan that I have. But even on a more immediate sense is that I knew when I was pursuing this, and from my conversation with actors today, a similar thing seems to be prevalent, is that they know they have a certain amount of ability and talent. But when they go to the gatekeepers who, like casting directors or producers who might give them a job and they have to audition for them, somehow they've got it that the importance of those people is a catalyst for them to freeze up and or be nervous and not show who they are. And it's a very specific form of, oh, there's something in the world that, but for that, I would have a better experience of what it is that I do. So it's a very clear opportunity for me to come in like with a Trojan horse and put this valuable understanding in the world. You know, because what I've been finding, and even working with a small group of actors right now, is that once they see who they truly are and what everything that they're experiencing is actually made of, they form their own conclusions about how irrelevant it is who the person is that they're reading for. But bigger than that, they see that, oh, this understanding of their true self is impactful in every arena of their life, way beyond just the acting realm. So in my view or intention, it's like, boy, this is just a perfect place to find people who seem like they've got a singularity of purpose to use this understanding and blow the doors open. At the same time, those that do, those carp that do make it up the waterfall into having a successful acting career will also be able to bring their more of themselves or true self to that realm. And so holds the possibility of transforming that whole world. Maybe, if it needs to be transformed even.
So at some stage, actually, Joel, I'd be quite interested to hear, you said what you were like afterwards and that it made a big impact on you, but what were you like before you heard about it?
Oh, so what was I like? I'm aware of having had a long time sense of inner disquiet about how the world was out there. And so we used to have a variety show. I don't know if news of it made it to your part of the world, but it was called the Ed Sullivan Show. You might have heard of it because the Beatles got their start there, but it was a staple of Sunday night viewing, and there would be all these wonderful performers doing all kinds of things. And there was a guy who would come on every once in a while, and his act was he had these upright, like, I don't know, bamboo sticks, and he would take these china plates and he would spin them on the stick, and then he would put like an ever expanding array of these things, and he have to run back and forth and keep all of them spinning, and there's drama, and like one was almost about to fall off and you get that, and another one would be falling off on the other end, and he'd have to go back and forth. That was, to me, like a perfect metaphor for how my life went, because there were endless things out in the world that were the equivalent of my plates that needed to be spinning, but for me they were the micromanaging of what I thought certain people thought of me. Usually it was attractive women, or sometimes it was people who might be able to help me in my career. Sometimes those were the same people, but it was an endless monitoring in the background of whatever it was I was doing for even the slightest variation in what I thought they might have thought of me. It took up a lot of real estate in my head, and I was never quite at peace for any long period of time. And I pursued a lot of avenues to try to get to that peace, and never was able to do it. It always looked like something in the world, usually another person or set of people in the world, needed to see me in exactly the right way, or I wasn't going to be okay. And then overnight, I heard something that seemed to sever in a way that I knew in my guts rather than philosophically. It severed the link between anything happening in the world and how I was feeling. And that's never come back in any permanent way over the last 4 to 5 years.
So I'm thinking that people might be wondering what it was that you heard.
Yeah. So possibly like Allie, although I don't know all the details of her dance with this understanding that some people are calling the 3 principles or the inside out understanding. I went to an event where the concept of it was first introduced to me. And so what I heard and what I got from just being around people who had had some experience with it was a touch with a piece that resided already inside of me, and that somehow my thinking was involved in what it was that I was feeling, not directly my outer experience. And that's all I got that first weekend of the event that I was at and the people that I associated with there. But that was a huge jumping off point, because immediately I was looking away from the world as the cause of my inner experience. And so I felt really great. I had started my coaching practice a little while before I met up with this understanding, and in sharing whatever little bit of it I could from what I understood seemed to be helpful to people I was already working with. But then after a while, I hit a plateau in my understanding, and I kept searching to understand more, not with the sense of like, oh boy, I've got to understand more, I'm not going to be okay. But I'm loving what it is that I'm experiencing, and I'm just curious to know more. And then through that, I developed relationships with some teachers. I had some interesting conversations with Garrett Kramer, and I got pointed to a world of like something that I'd heard Sid Banks talk about early on in my experience with this, that fascinated the heck out of me. When I heard this saying from him, it's kind of a famous quote amongst some people who've been around for a while, but whoever told me said, we can't tell people this right away. This is for people who've been around for a while. And what they quoted was Sid's sense that there's nothing outside that can hurt you, and there's nothing outside that can help you, because there is no outside. That really tickled something in my curiosity. So in these further conversations was like looking into, well, what's that about? And I started becoming interested in the consciousness element of these so-called three principles. Like, what is it that seems to know every possible experience that I could have? Like I could say, I'm really upset, or I really want her to like me, or I love English toffee, or I am upset with my politics in this country, or I wish it were Wednesday. and at the start of any one of those seemingly disparate statements and what have you, is this character called I that knows all of those. If I was upset, I could be upset at a level 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 minute. And I could be upset at a level 8 over the same situation in another minute. I could forget about it and look for my car keys that I lose a million times a day, and then go back to a level 5 upset about that thing. But there was something that was knowing all of those different levels of the upset, and knowing of the needing of the finding the car keys and everything in between, that itself wasn't on any sort of variation, nor was it ever not there. And when that started to become even more interesting than what that was knowing, then my sense of expansion seemed to know no bounds. I don't know if that made sense. I hope it did.
I don't think making sense really matters too much.
I have less of a need to care about making sense, but for your guys' sake, I like to check in once in a while.
So maybe Ali would like to say something now.
I bet.
Yeah, sure. That quote that you just quoted from Sid Banks was one of the first things that really intrigued me as well, the idea of there being no outside. And I came into the whole world of the three principles originally through seeking something. And very similar actually to Joel, became very interested with the kind of idea of consciousness. the idea that I wasn't my thinking or wasn't the thoughts going through my head was huge when I first saw that. And the idea that I couldn't possibly be anything of these temporary, transient thoughts, feelings, relationships, statuses, job titles, all of that was incredible and freeing and huge. So very quickly, the idea of what I wasn't became apparent. But the bit that I was more interested in, like Joel was alluding to, was what I really was. And that's the bit that kind of, just is amazing. And I just love it. And that's a bit that I'm still exploring now and probably will do for, the rest of my life. But it's definitely that sense of, for me, that sense of this looking, the three principles were brilliantly instrumental for me. And taking, I think, the idea of the space, the screen, the backdrop, the background, whatever you want to call it, the canvas in which everything else appears, that has become such a source of okayness. And not okayness as in everything's okay and I'm always happy and I'm always at peace. Just a backdrop of okay, of neutral okayness. And the people that I work with, I can see now myself as I used to be in all of them. They're just so caught up in the narrowed down field of vision, in the separate self, and the idea that this collection of sensations and thoughts and doings is really all that there is and all that matters. And just that idea of stepping back into who we really are, and that allowing itself, if you like, to percolate through our existence, just seems to be that our life doesn't necessarily change, in the world, but there is a sense of everything being looked at with such a fresh perspective that it no longer holds the same burden or weight, or whatever the word you said earlier, Joel, that you call yourself now as a coach. What was it? Suffer. The removal of end of suffering coach, which I like. And I often talk about it as being life unburdened. So we're still expressing ourselves as this little piece of divinity, and we will continue to do so, but it's with a increased sense of freedom and understanding that just seems to allow an easier movement through it all. And certainly I know this, we're looking at a lot about young people and teenagers, and I certainly see it with the teenagers that I work with at the age they are, mainly between 15 and 18 kind of age. They've got a very, very, and quite rightly so as well, really strongly sense of ego, very strongly identified with ego, which is an essential part, as I can make out, of growing up, really, to kind of get a strong sense of self. But it seems like at that age, they're starting to recognize more and more that they're being squeezed into this very narrow path, either by well-meaning parents or the school system or society as a whole. And you can see these teenagers wanting to expand, but being forced to contract. And you can see them sort of pushing against that and not knowing where to go. And so to give them even a slightest sense of that unburdening or end of suffering seems to be a really, really useful thing to do.
And is there a particular way that you do that, or you just talk about your experience? Or
I don't tend now to use so much personal stories, actually, as maybe I would have done a while ago. The way I would do it would very much depend on, on who was in the room in front of me. But it's really, for me, it's about, I guess it starts with my knowing of who they are and my knowing of who I am, and me, like that deep knowing of just the fact that I know it's not true. I know it's not that real. I know that when they're stuck in the illusion of separation, they're going to suffer because suffering equals ego equals suffering. Suffering is always going to appear in the world of the separate self, and this individual person that's not connected to anything else, that really feels that they have to protect themselves and defend themselves, and that is vulnerable to attack. And once they see themselves only as that, then there's no way they can't suffer, because you know, once I can start to help them open up a bit more of an idea that there's a bigger space in which they exist. So it's like at the moment they're living in a very small house where everything means a lot, and everything they think about themselves or everything they believe other people think, whatever, everything means an awful lot. Everything's real. Everything is scary because their life has to be a certain way for them to be okay, and they need to get certain grades, or they need to have a certain look or boyfriend or girlfriend or hairstyle or whatever it is that they think is, it really feels like that is the key to happiness, to peace. And what I want them to do is open the door to that little house and step out into this massive, gigantic house, if you like. It's not a brilliant analogy, but, you know, and see that there's just more going on, and that this little house is contained, if you will, within a much, much larger space. And what they thought was real and true and absolute and meaningful about them as this individual person maybe can loosen its grip somewhat. And the sense then of who they really are, which is an expression of this one being that we all share. And teenagers get this. They really get the fact that they're connected to everything. That's the bit that I think really seems to, they get it quickly. I don't know whether they've had less conditioning out of that, perhaps. I don't know. It feels that way. But that's the bit they seem to get. And then from that, it can be it's unburdening. It's unburdening for me of everything, rather than looking at this issue with the boyfriend and this issue with the hairstyle and this issue with the parent and the teacher. It's putting all of that, it's listening to that, but putting all of that kind of slightly down, turning them around and looking back home, you know, and from that place, they can turn around and look back out on all that stuff again, but it just has a different. And now I'm thinking, am I making sense, Joel?
Tremendous.
It all just seems to have that different flavor and a bit of a softening around the edges. If that seems to be the starting point, certainly with the teenagers that I work with.
Yeah. And again, I think it doesn't really matter if it doesn't make sense, because it does at some level anyway. So we have a few people on, and I haven't said to everyone, I don't think, that if you want to ask questions, we can't see you. We can see a list of people who are here, but we can't actually see you on the screen. So if you do have any questions, you can just type them into the chat box if you'd like to make any comments or questions, and you can come on and speak if you'd like to. So if there's anything that you'd like to discuss or ask questions or go any further with, then please do that. And yeah, in the meantime, anything else? Let's have a look and see. I don't think, oh, here we go. Let's see. David says, has either of you worked with clients with severe daily anxiety-related physical pain?
I haven't actually had a client with that specific.
I haven't had somebody come to me specifically for that. I don't know that they weren't having pains and talking to me about something else, or weren't experiencing chronic pain from my talking to them. But I did share something with somebody recently, and it seemed to make a little bit of a difference. And I know it's always tricky when we get into our personal stories, but I did have an experience of hurting myself in a workout about a month ago at this gym. And I hurt my back pretty bad. It was hard to sit, but I could do the one thing that I love to do, and the only thing I really do for exercise, which is walk a lot. So the very day of the injury, here I am about to share a personal story. Forgive me for those who don't like it, but the day of the injury, I was walking around and I was getting intermittent twinges of pain in the area that I'd hurt in my lower back. And for some reason, it occurred to me to try to apply to my own situation pretty much what I share with people who are struggling with emotional and internal sort of suffering in that way. So I thought, well, let me allow the pain for just a moment. And let me look at it as if I'm actually the knower of the sensation of the pain rather than a person with the pain who's suffering from it. I mean, I don't know that I worded it that specifically to myself, but in description, that's what it was. Like, how do I know I'm the knower of this sensation rather than someone who's identified and absorbed in the sensation? And within seconds, the quality of the experience of the pain changed. And it seemed to dissipate to the point where I didn't even notice it for the rest of the walk. And then a couple times since then, in just like maybe I moved the wrong way in relation to my injury, I would get a searing, scary pain and thought like, oh, maybe I've done it now. I'm broken myself and I'll have to see if I'm still under warranty and get a new body to. So when that sort of pain comes up, I've sat with it again. And sort of try to allow myself to see myself as the knower of this very intense sensation rather than the victim of a scary thing of pain. And every time that's happened, I've had the same experience where it's almost like the sensation can't bear the weight of my neutral attention on it. And so I've shared that with somebody who I was working with on something else who mentioned a pain that they were experiencing, and they seemed to have a lessening of that. I'm a little reluctant to put that out as a tool now for the toolbox. But there's a way I know for myself, if I look at it, it's consistent with the idea of understanding being the antidote to suffering. So I hope that's helpful, David.
So let me, I can't see if there are any other questions at the moment. If anyone else has questions that's come on, you can just type them into the chat box. I have an interesting, something that came to me actually while you were talking about that. So I spoke about the very interesting experience I had with pain when I broke my shoulder when I was skiing a couple of years ago. And I spoke about that on a previous session, so I won't go into that again. But what came to my mind just now was that I used to do a lot of energy healing. Now, I don't know what energy healing is as such, but I used to do these energy healing sessions, right? And I still do sometimes, but I have no idea. Well, I mean, I do have some ideas about what's going on, but I'm interested in it from this perspective, if you know what I mean. So there was one time when I was a GP, a family doctor in England, and the other doctor in the practice knew that I did some of this stuff, and he asked me to go and see a patient of his one time who had very bad back pain, and he couldn't do anything with it. And he said, would I go and see her because she was a spiritual healer, and he thought I could help her. And when I went to see her, she actually was very poorly. And I said, I think, I did some blood tests, and then I did this healing session, which just sitting, for me, was just sitting in the energy of whatever you want to call it, just like sort of like we do in therapy sessions with this understanding. And afterwards, she said she felt completely better. And I took the blood tests to the laboratory, and half an hour later, they rang me and told me that these blood tests were completely abnormal. She was very ill. Her kidneys weren't working. Her liver wasn't working, blah, blah. So I sent her into the hospital. And when she got to the hospital, they redid the blood tests and they were completely normal. And I'm like, how on earth does, it's like none of it is real, is it? If you know what I mean. It's like nothing out there is I just think it's such fun.
Yeah. Fun is a really great word for it. Life is just fun.
Yeah.
Even the stuff that I would have avoided at all costs, and still probably, would prefer not to have happen. Somehow that is part of a bigger arena of fun. Because I just know somehow in the background, it's like, it's going to be interesting to see how this resolves, knowing what I know now.
Yeah.
And understanding is the linchpin. We may end up doing all the same things that we were doing before the understanding, but the very fact that it's being done from that place of understanding changes everything.
Yeah,
but even that's funny, because both of you finished by saying, "Did you understand any of that?"
Well, we were actually talking down. We were saying, "Did you understand what I see so clearly?"
I think David's asked something else, I think.
How do you see energy healing from the perspective of the principles? Well, that's sort of what I was saying, David. I don't know. I mean, it's like, since nothing is real and everything is just energy, I think even when I was doing energy healing and didn't see things the way I quite see them now, I knew it was just energy and everything. Even as a doctor, I knew that bones could heal, actually, because they're only energy, and they can, and they do. Even I know that there are people who have had broken bones and have not had broken bones the next day. So it's everything is possible. It's just, I'm not saying that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm saying, but because I know it's not possible to do that. That we as human beings don't necessarily have the power to do that. But yeah. Since everything is,
I'm not sure that even looking at things from the perspective of the principles is sometimes again, that can limit an answer into a direction that maybe it doesn't exist, if you like. Yeah. For that reason, really, because some of this stuff is just a big old mystery.
And something occurred to me as you were explaining that too. It's like coming back to the idea of knowing who we truly are. And as you were alluding to, we as individual human beings can't really ultimately do something. But if we know who we are as the shared non-separateness of consciousness, okay, within that, any possible sort of activity and experience takes place. From the standpoint of a separate individual contained in a flesh and meat suit with a current cluster of thoughts, if we're a doctor, well, let's take it up a doctor, because that's what you are. Let's say you were like a house painter, okay? So from the individual perspective of the house painter, you're painting houses and putting pretty colors on houses and making them more attractive than they might have been. But from the standpoint of the inseparability of consciousness, this is just all the continued temporary flow of stuff going on within consciousness. So it's only from I'm a separate thing that I'm doing something called healing or advising or whatever, and it seems to be having X effect or Y effect or whatever. But it's both the doing of it and the X or Y effect or whatever are all happening within this one thing that we are. I don't know, somehow knowing that, my distress seems to go down even further.
Yeah, it is that, like you said then, Joel, we're always going to suffer when we believe we are the body. We can't help but suffer when we believe that we are confined to the body, and anything that we feel that looks like it's within that body we're going to suffer with, whether that's physical pain or emotional pain or however that looks. And when we remember that pain isn't really within the body, pain is made of awareness, pain is made of consciousness, like everything else. Yeah. It feels like pain when it is confined within the body and when we believe that's all we are. And when we can look and see who we really are, then the sensation of that can be a different. There can be pain with suffering, and there can be pain without suffering, or pain with less suffering. And that's not to diminish the suffering of people in pain, because when you're in that state, it feels very, very, very true and real, and it's an experience that's happening. Yeah. It's that, and it's going to happen when we're confined to the limits of the body, when we believe that's what we are. And that's what Joel was just saying then, that shift in awareness or perspective it's the difference between suffering, the sensation, and possibly not so much suffering, or not at all, perhaps.
That's exactly what I was talking about when I broke my shoulder. But totally what I was talking about, because it was a lot of pain, but I wasn't suffering. It was just a really, like, from the human point of view, it was a really surreal experience, and everybody kept saying to me, every now and then, like it would, like you said, Joel, it would go into spasm, and I would go, oh, just natural reaction, physical reaction. And people would say, oh, are you? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. It was not bothering me. And I slept on it all night without knowing that it was broken, and even when the doctor told me I was broken, I was really surprised. Wow. Yeah. So, and that was not deliberately trying to think about it in a different way. That was just my experience.
That's really beautiful. And I think probably if the three of us were to put our heads together and define what we meant by suffering, we'd come up with pretty much the same thing. Suffering is, I have this experience in front of me, this powerful sensation I'm feeling, or the circumstance that I don't prefer, and I need it to be different. Or I imagine that there's a place in space and time where things are different, and I'll be better once I'm there. And this gap between where I'm actually at and that place is exactly the measure of what we would call suffering. Suffering is that need for it to be different. When we see who we truly are, and that there aren't separate places or separate circumstances or separate things to acquire from us in order to be better, then in some ways, by definition, we are living here and now and not needing it to be different, because there isn't any different place to get to. And it's the realization of that it seems to have for me, it seems to have the set in motion the byproducts of things that I was seeking for a long time, like acceptance, trying to come into the now, being grateful, being more appreciative, having more self-esteem, having more confidence. Everything that I had long sought was now revealed to be what I truly am is made from, and all available to every one of us at all times. Once we start turning the direction of where we're looking from stuff in the world to this knowing awareness or conscious awareness that we are.
But even that sounds like we have to do something, like we have to turn to look.
Yeah, it's so hard to find the words to convey something, because words themselves separate things out. We don't have to do it. This seems to me like the one sort of activity that is really a disguised letting go of all the other activities. So it looks like turning, you know, like an act of turning towards who we are. It's more no longer looking in the other direction. So by default, it's a turning to who we are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think also what you said about it sort of happened once. I think that's the thing, is it just all of those things happen without you doing anything. You can't make it happen.
Right.
You can't make yourself have that experience, as far as I can see.
Right. Yeah, I don't think you can make yourself have any experience. Somehow us all bumping into each other and starting to look in this direction. And now words become really useless here, but they seem to afford us opportunities to look more in that direction. But yes, we're not in control of when it does occur to us to look in the direction, when it doesn't.
So I think I've missed a couple of comments. Did you make 2 comments, David? David, do you want to come on and say something, because I'm missing your comments? Would you like to come on, and I can invite you on if you'd like to. Just because it looks like you have a few. If you
the type is really small on my screen.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, David. So the last, I missed the previous comment because they disappear. And this last one says, whenever there is relief on any level, including physical, has an insight occurred, whether conscious or not?
Okay.
I think with that one, I think an insight. I think that I'm looking in a slightly different direction with this, whereby the pain sort of felt and experienced by the body is because we're seeing when we're seeing this again, this kind of separate self, this body is all there is, we're going to feel the pain. Now, us as a body, we're being born constantly by every thought that we have. It's actually, and this does sound, you know, quite far out there to some people, but it's the body that comes and goes, really. It's the body that comes and goes. And because the body is kind of born again every time we have a thought or a sensation. And when the pain, it's not so much that the pain comes and goes from the body as the other way around. So an insight, you know, I know you said whenever there's relief, has an insight occurred. And someone actually, it's a very important point, Fiona has also said, could you talk about why this understanding is not spiritual bypassing? And I get what you're saying, because it can sound like we're saying pain isn't real or pain is irrelevant, perhaps. Without talking to Fiona, I don't know exactly what she's saying there, but it's certainly not at all about diminishing the reality of someone who is experiencing physical pain. That's in no way at all what we are trying to do. It's a more generic question. Okay, so it's not about trying to gloss over. It's the opposite. It's not really about trying to gloss over pain, whether that be physical or emotional, or just kind of pretend it's, I don't know. I know there are teachers, gurus perhaps out there who do sound like that's what they're saying, and maybe they are, maybe they're not. But it's certainly not about that. It's kind of the opposite of that, really. It's about being able to go to the heart of that pain and see that there's not see what it's really made of, I suppose, as opposed to just pushing it to one side or pretending it doesn't exist or putting our fingers in our ears. And if that's what you mean, Fiona,
would Fiona be willing to come on and explain further? The reason I would like to ask her is I've heard the term spiritual bypassing in several different bodies of exploration that I've gone into, and each time the people who mentioned the term seem to have a solid idea of what they meant. In many of the cases, it looked like they meant something different from one another. So I'm curious to know specifically what she's meaning by spiritual bypassing before I could tackle it, because I have some ideas percolating, but.
Oh.
Fee, would you like to come on?
She said, yes, you can come on, but she wasn't referring specifically to the pain question. But I do think it's probably an important one for everything, actually.
Yeah, I'd love to grill you to find out exactly what you meant.
I'm just trying to find the button to do it now. Hang on one second.
Please no. You're very friendly, really, aren't you, Joel?
I am. We're seen our butts, so already.
Oh, I know where it is. It's in here somewhere. There we go. Wait a minute. Fiona, allow more. There we go. It should be coming on now. There we go. There's Fiona.
Cool. Hey there.
Hi. So actually, I was just raising a separate question altogether, not specifically at all about the pain question. So if you want to wrap up the pain question before you deal with this one, that's cool.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm ready to jump in. So let me throw something out and see if this relates to what you're saying. Spiritual bypassing.
I can just let you know that I had to Google this in the middle of the night because I was struggling for some reason, not sleeping last night, and it was on my mind. So I Googled because I thought, I don't know if I'm really sure what people mean when they say spiritual bypassing.
Well,
but what I kind of was, the kind of ballpark I was in was that although we are all one and we have an experience of the mind body in this world, that mind body needs to live in this world. So it was just occurring to me that, or maybe I was wondering whether it's possible that we can kind of step back too much into the oneness and then not, in a sense, stand up for things that the mind body should either be entitled to or should do for its well-being or its benefit, kind of living on the. Do you remember we had a conversation once, Joel, about things coming out in the wash? And I was just sort of like kind of referring back to that, I suppose, in a bit. Like, at what point, when just because I'm okay with the whole situation, even though it's not kind of in Fiona's favour, at what point do I need to step out of being okay and step into the kind of real world to protect Fiona's rights or name or whatever?
Okay. Yeah.
That's what that's kind of how I was coming at it. It's like,
right.
Because what I see as being very different about, a lot of spiritual healing stuff out there, a whole bunch of which I've done in the past. and it never really did anything for me. And what came to me was there's all these people being, and forgive me because it's probably going to sound a bit condescending, but you know, like crystal healing and being a special person, a star seed, or God knows, there are all sorts of woo, fairy, airy, fairy things out there. But to me, this understanding is so far removed from airy, fairy, woo woo. But I was just wondering whether there was a degree to which we are so okay with everything. We're so okay with pain that we forget to look after ourselves.
Right. So that just being okay with everything, and papering over hurts and bad so-called bad experiences, whatever, with the understand, oh no, everything's just happening in consciousness and it's okay, might then be equivalent to something that some people may put the label spiritual bypassing on. And what it's looking more clearly to me is that this is not about putting a veneer of everything's happening in consciousness, so it's okay. What happens is there's more for us to explore. You know, there's a lot of stuff that we experience in our physical body, like pain and discomfort and what have you, that is kind of calling us back to look at ourselves as being separate. The experience is so vivid, the sensations are so powerful that they call part of our understanding, like, no, but I am locked here in this body. My understanding of non-separation has not completely overtaken my senses that feel this horrible stuff, and therefore I've got stuff in here, and this has to be handled, and then I can go back to all that understanding my non.
Yeah, it's not. It's
and it's just that we haven't yet examined that. I've been finding for myself, like really granularly looking at little pockets of stuff going on inside me that kind of call me back to that separation, like really seeing through those and really starting to see that, oh, I only know any part of my experience through these physical sensations, through perceptions like seeing and hearing and smelling stuff, and thoughts. I don't know a world out there, and I don't know a body going through stuff other than through those three channels. So now, because of that, it has inspired me, when I think of it, to look at those little hurts or feelings or things in the body, and have it look like, well there's two aspects to something going on in the body. There's a physical sensation, and then there's some story kind of arc welded to it, a story where there's a me as a separate entity involved in it. And if I could pull those two things apart, I hope this isn't running off the rails.
No, it's cool. I think if you don't mind me jumping in for a second here as well, I think that we are in danger of sometimes it can look like we're saying, ignore physical pain, just don't do anything about it, don't worry about it, you know. And that's really the opposite thing. It's the body's going to do what the body's going to do, and you break your leg, you're not really going to sit around and not get it fixed. It's just that it's all happening. It's all made of consciousness. It's all happening in consciousness. And what we sometimes, you know, there's no part of me certainly that's telling people who are ill not to get treatment, or it's not that. It's really not that, if that's what you mean by the idea of spiritual bypassing, which I think is what some people can mean, isn't it? It's that from the perspective of the separate self, we're going to suffer with the pain or the illness or the, you know, if we've got a labeled disease, if we've got an amputated leg, whatever, we're going to suffer when we are limited to the body, when we're in separate self. when we are from the perspective of the true self, from the perspective of one being, from the perspective of consciousness, awareness, then there's no suffering there. That doesn't mean that when we are in separation, we're not going to suffer. That's the point. When we're seeing ourselves as separate, we are suffering. Separation equals suffering. And that's not to say that we can't, I can't see a way, I'm being personal now, I can't see a way that we're ever going to be fully away from that. We're in this human experience. We're having this in and out flow of seeing ourselves as a separate self and really identifying with that strongly, and then sometimes remembering who we really are, or being pointed in that direction by a lovely friend or teacher or whatever. And then we're going to be in that flux all the time, suffering, non-suffering, suffering, non-suffering. And I think that the more we look in this direction, the more that sense of who we are sort of percolates through, I think is, a word that's often used, then that can start to have a big impact on our lives. But I don't think for a second that we're going to sit and not look after our body. Like, the body's going to do what the body does. It's where we're looking at it from that's going to have the impact. If that,
that's part.
Rather than, oh, I have this understanding, so just ignore. It's like, no, let's go right to the heart of what's hurting,
because
physically or emotionally.
Yeah.
And look at what is the very stuff of that hurt, my experience of that hurt made of. Let's look at it, see through what's illusory, see what's true, and from that place of understanding, then doing whatever it is that makes sense to do.
Yeah, and from that place of understanding, being able to do it with much, when you are in that place of understanding, much more clarity, actually, much less layers of veiling, less fear-based decision making, potentially less separation, kind of confusion, if you like. It still means we're going to take action, because if I really, really just believed everything, not believed, if I was stuck in the idea of spiritual bypassing and just had that vibe of, it's all just conscious, doesn't matter, I'd never pick my kids up from school. I'd never, do you know what I mean? It just wouldn't happen, would it? But that doesn't seem to make sense to me, to not do that. Just because I'm exploring who I really am, I'm still going to pick my kids up from school, but the whole thing is just held in a different space, the whole entirety of life. I'm still making their breakfast and moaning about the washing and picking them up from school and, dealing with bodily pain if and when I have it, but it's from a different perspective. And that seems to be the shift that can make the difference, I suppose.
Yes, Linda says you can have your experience without your experience having you.
Oh, that's very nice. Yes. Yeah, very nice.
And David says he loves that too. Yeah. Spiritual bypassing often comes out of approaches that emphasize inhabiting and directly experiencing the body and emotions. That was his previous comment.
Okay.
So anyone else who would like to come on and speak and discuss, you're quite welcome to, as well as just making comments I think everybody knows that now. So everyone else.
And it's nice to see you, Fiona.
Yes, I know.
Did that answer any of what you were asking?
I think it did. I can certainly see, from a pain point of view, it makes no sense. If it's something physical with the body, it makes no sense to just ignore it. I suppose in terms of maybe maybe some other things which aren't necessarily body specific. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not even really quite sure if I would just wonder if it there are circumstances where it might be different. I don't know. I mean, obviously for Ali, picking the kids up for school is she's not going to sit there thinking, well, we're all one, I'm okay, they must be okay, therefore they can walk home on their own, and because they're too young, so of course it makes sense to go and pick them up. Yeah, I don't think I can dig any deeper with that anymore. That maybe needs to percolate some more.
Mm. Yeah, what David just says there, it's about perspective, not disinhabiting our human life. I think that, because ultimately we, as far as I can see, we can't disinhabit our human life, because that's what we're doing. And the idea that we could is one of the issues, isn't it, of some, the idea that we can kind of, I don't know, get rid of ego, or they do. A lot of people do try, and I think it becomes another coping mechanism to avoid suffering, when actually, again, it's just slightly looking in the wrong direction, really. It's all about avoiding suffering, isn't it? And actually, what we're talking about is going to the heart of suffering, which is the opposite of what we're told in society, what we're brought up with thinking we need to do. We're told to avoid suffering at all costs, aren't we? We have that impression because we believe, we grow up where we see ourselves as such separate entities that we have to avoid suffering, and it's actually seeing that suffering is not what we think it is.
Right, and I think it would bear a more nuanced discussion of what inhabiting a human life means too.
Yeah.
Because as Ali was saying earlier, your sense of a human life is really just something that arises with each thought that you have and dissipates between those thoughts. So the inhabiting is becoming more and more an unuseful word for me.
Yeah, because it's held a bit more loosely than that, isn't it, than inhabiting.
It's like the entirety of a concept of a human life is something that who I really am knows, rather than a thing unto itself. Again, that probably bears more of a
that could be a whole week-long discussion, but exactly that. And yes, as David's saying, it's moment to moment rather than a solid thing, and it just happens to look so solid, doesn't it, that we kind of forget that all the time. But we are this is the way in which we are, the one being is experiencing right now, and that comes and goes, and it's not solid at all. We think it is. And so when we start going into spiritual bypassing and having a human experience, it can sometimes shift too far in the other direction, if you like, of looking at this body as something very solid and this human experience something very solid. It's what we're doing right now. It's how we are experienced right now.
Yeah, it's like one moment you could be locked in a battle in your mind over whether you're having spiritual bypass, and a minute later you could be eating really good fish and chips and have dropped the whole concern, and the I who is locked in the battle of whether it was spiritual bypass and the I who's enjoying fish and chips is unscathed by
it is. It's always going back to that I, isn't it? Like Giles saying, like the I that is confused about all of this, the I that was 3 years old, the I that was 13 years old, the I that's been in physical pain, and the I that hasn't been in physical pain, and the I that has suffered, and the I that's not. The I is the same with everything else that seemingly comes and goes, and that is it. Simply put, that's the place to look. If there's any doing to be done, it's just look there more and more. And from that, there's no prescription, is there here? There's no guaranteed outcome that we're trying to get to. It's just, seeing that expansive, limitless, non-separate I that's always been the same throughout every single experience that you think you have had, is the source of everything, and is therefore also the source of, I'm even reluctant to say peace, but it is peace as far as I can make out. but that's the place to look to in all of this. But it doesn't mean that when you look there, you dissolve into it to the extent that you suddenly morph into the sofa and don't care about your kids. It's not, as we're here, as this temporary human expression, we're going to still knock up against other human expressions, and we're going to do the things that other human. We're not in control or choosing any of it really. Anyway, we're just kind of doing. We're just being an expression of this one being, and somehow the whole idea that we're sat around discussing that can be quite funny. For me, it kind of lightens it up, but it's certainly not to dismiss anything that's being suffered either. It's not. It's really not. When it looks real, and it is real in that moment to that, that particular body mind. So it's just the remembering of,
all of these experiences, as Ali said, they are real. They are real experiences. What's just become fascinating, probably to her as well as to me, is that they're real. They're just different in nature than what they appear to be.
Yeah.
And that becomes endlessly fascinating, at least in my case. So there's no, in my sense, having to do more looking towards this. It's just, compared to everything else, this is the most interesting thing that I've, what is the nature of everything? It's kind of fascinating.
Well, David's last comment was seeing the moment to momentness softens and lightens.
Oh yeah, and I love that word, lightens. That's what I think, this whole thing can do really, is just lighten up the yeah that's really cool.
So that seems like a really good place to stop, actually, unless anyone else has anything else burning that they'd like to say or contribute, or which I don't.
No, and obviously Joel and I would be happy. I'm sure Joel would be happy to speak to people offline as well if they want to. I'm certainly happy to.
Yeah.
Yes, and
conversation, we're happy to extend it on the parameters.
Absolutely, and your bios and your links are all on thesecretofeverything.com. So if anyone wants to find out more details, then it's very easy. You can get a free all access pass to listen to all of these and all of the recordings and so on, just by signing up there. So and that way you can get all the details. But obviously, you're available on Facebook and so on.
Everywhere else in the whole world, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks so much. Thank you very much. That was real fun.
And thank you.
Okay. See you both again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.